Everyone. It really is a pleasure to see all of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. Um, to begin, I'd like to share the university's land acknowledgement. The University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping ground of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people, and we honor and respect the enduring and continuing relationship between the indigenous people and this land by teaching and learning more about their history and present day communities, and by becoming stewards of the land we too inhabit. So we are so fortunate to have Christiane Amanpour as a URI alum, and I know there's many URI alums in the room here too. So welcome, welcome. She gives generously of her time, talent, expertise, not only to URI, but she does it to the entire world. Now more than ever, it is so important that we recognize and celebrate the incredible work that journalists are doing. Today, as you all know, we are seeing difficult images and hearing heartbreaking stories unfolding in real time across the nation and around the world. And as I've also seen on campus, the impact of these stories on our students and community members is particularly hard this past year. And as hard as it is also an important reminder of our interconnectedness, our humanity, and of our needs to understand and engage with the world around us in meaningful ways. And here at URI, it has become even more important to ensure that our community members have a safe place to be heard, to come together, and to have important and sometimes difficult conversations. And I credit the writers, the photographers, the reporters, the videographers who often risk their lives bringing us moving images and the powerful words that help guide these conversations and connect us to the stories happening outside of Kingston and far beyond Rhode Island, which is why we are here this evening to celebrate and to learn from those who tell these stories. Christiane Amanpour has been an award-winning trailblazer in her reporting. She is a leading global journalist and a mentor and an inspiration to so many. So after graduating from URI, she began her career as a journalist at CNN as an entry-level assistant on the network's international assignment desk in Atlanta. 4 decades later, and through her combined tenures at CNN, CBS, ABC News, and PBS, she has fundamentally changed the face of global journalism. She has interviewed major world leaders, from Iranian presidents to the presidents of Afghanistan and Sudan, from prime ministers of Israel and presidents of Palestine to Gaddafi, Mubarak during the Arab Spring. She has thoughtfully and fearlessly brought world events into the homes of millions, and she has earned every major television journalism award. I will list a few, including Television Academy Honor, 9 News and Documentary Emmy Awards, 4 George Foster Peabody Awards, 2 George Polk Awards, 3 DuPont Columbia Awards, the Courage in Journalism Award, there were Murrow Award, a Giants of Broadcasting honor from the Library of American Broadcasting, and the recently announced 2025 Fulbright Prize. To say that we are fortunate to have this lecture series named in her honor would be an understatement. Today, the Amanpour Lecture is a critical platform at URI for learning, discussion, inspiration, and the promotion of ethical journalism. The series plays a vital role in the student experience for our journalists and faculty scholars, and allows broader audiences to engage with and discover the complexities of the job of today's journalist. I'm really pleased to offer my sincere thanks on behalf of the entire university for Christiane's contributions to URI and the world. Christiane is unable to join us in person tonight, but she has provided a video to introduce tonight's speaker, Nancy Gibbs. I look forward to tonight's conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and it's now, I believe, my pleasure to introduce Professor Dan Hunt, also a URI alum. Am I getting it out of order? Christiane first. Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to introduce our new Professor Dan Hunt, who is also journalism. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone from London. I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's speaker, Nancy Gibbs, for the 2024 Amanpour Lecture in the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island, my alma mater. I wish I could be there because Gibbs is really special. She is the Edward R. Murrow Professor of Practice and Director of the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Until 2018, she was editor-in-chief of Time, directing news and feature coverage for more than 65 million readers across all US, European, and Asian editions. Gibbs was named Time's 17th editor in September 2013, and she's the first woman to hold that position. She remains an editor at large. She's led Time through a period of media upheaval, and she built the largest audience in its history, accelerating its transformation into a global 24/7 digital news operation. In her final year at Time Inc., Gibbs also served as editorial director of Time Inc. News Group, overseeing multi-platform content for Time, Money, and Fortune magazines. During her 3 decades at Time, she covered 4 presidential campaigns, and she's the author of more cover stories than any writer in Time's near 100-year history, including the black-bordered September 11th special issue, which won the National Magazine Award in 2002. In addition to the National Magazine Award, she's the recipient of the Matrix Award, the Society of Professional Journalists Hall of Fame, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Newswomen's Club of New York, Folio's Top Women in Media, and many, many more. She's also co-authored, along with Michael Duffy, 2 best-selling presidential histories, The President's Club, Inside the World's Most Exclusive Fraternity, which spent 30 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and The Preacher and the Presidents, Billy Graham in the White House. In her lecture tonight, called Our Information Emergency, Truth and Trust in a Polarized Age, Gibbs asks, what will it take to build an information environment that best serves the interests of individuals and society at large? So please join me in welcoming Nancy Gibbs to the stage tonight.
You can imagine what an honor it is for any journalist, certainly women of my generation, to get to deliver a lecture that is endowed by and named for Christiane. She has been such an icon and a beacon to us as someone who, if you want to know how to interview a tyrant, watch Amanpour. If you want to understand how to be fair without being morally numb, watch Amanpour. If you want to understand how to bring your whole self, head, and heart to your work, she had been a North Star for us. So it is a thrill to get to be here. It was a thrill to get to spend time with URI students in class today. And frankly, I wish that I had a cheerful, upbeat, optimistic, rainbows and sunshine kind of message to deliver. If I did, the words you see on the screen would not be the words you see on screen. You say, why did I call this our information emergency? I asked our friends, the robot, to illustrate for me how people are envisioning the choices that they will make 26 days from now when we face what is routinely called the most fateful election of our lifetimes. And I don't think that is just recency bias. None of us have any idea where this road leads. There are some things that we do know. We do know that right now there is one thing that people in this country agree on, and that is the belief that democracy is being threatened. The minute you ask them, however, about the source of the threat, that unity dissolves. A Georgetown, George Mason poll said that 51% of people view Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans as the source of that threat, while 47% view the mainstream media as the source of that threat. If you think about what this looks like, the election that is cited most often about how did we get here, have we ever been here before, is 1968, this year of the last time an incumbent president decided not to run again, when there were successful assassinations, there was blood in the streets. And yet it is also true that when Gallup was asking people, do you trust the government to do the right thing all or most of the time? The overwhelming majority of people said yes. Ask them now, and that is the trend line that you get. So think about this. In 1968, this era of enormous division and violence and disruption and fear for the future of the country, that was occurring at a time when people's trust in institutions was still extraordinarily high. And that trust has been dissolving rather steadily ever since. So now when you ask people about the state of our politics, they use words like divisive, corrupt, messy, chaotic. And when you ask them about trust in mass media, it is now at a historic low, where 39% of people say they have none at all. And another 29% say they don't have very much. And that is just an extraordinary challenge for all of us who take very seriously that the founders of this country had a reason for making the press the only constitutionally protected industry. That there was something important to the very health, success, and survival of what was a grand experiment almost 250 years ago, in the press being able to function at a certain level. I would argue that decline in trust is not about our performance or nostalgia for some golden age of journalism when literally Superman's alter ego was a reporter, right? There are so many ways in which our newsrooms are more enterprising, more diverse, doing kinds of data analysis and deep investigative reporting that is extraordinarily important. When you ask people why they don't trust the press, they don't really talk about you're doing a bad job with your reporting. 67% of them talk about bias, spin, agendas. When you ask people about why they don't trust the news, 63% of the people who don't trust the news say it's because they see a great deal of bias. People who do trust the news don't think that there is a bias problem. And globally, this is not just a United States thing. When the Reuters Institute at Oxford asked people in multiple different countries with different kinds of media ecosystems, again and again and again, what they found was that people believe, especially young people, that powerful people use the media to advance their political and financial interests, and that they force journalists to cover stories in a certain way. And I will tell you, it surprises people when I tell them that in more than 30 years in a newsroom, when I was assigned the major stories of the time, including 5 presidential elections, no one ever told me what our position was supposed to be or how I was supposed to write those stories. And yet the perception that people who own newsrooms or lead them are telling their reporters what to write is a widespread and I think very dangerous perception. Meanwhile, there is the abiding challenge that political journalism especially spends way too much time on the food fights. That we admire the problem, keep the score, rank the players, trade the gossip, and do not pay attention to the issues that actually matter to people. Nearly 4 out of 5 people say that just partisan battles get way too much coverage and the important issues don't, that we cover the wrong things. And that undermines trust. So out of that low trust, and maybe even more relevant, the issue of how relevant the news is, we are seeing growing reports of news fatigue and actually of active news avoidance. And people saying that they are deliberately looking for ways to consume less news. And when you ask them why, they say, because it makes me feel bad. It makes me angry or depressed, or it makes me feel manipulated, or it's just exhausting. And so you are having, it's 59% of people saying that they are trying to limit how much, especially political news, they are seeing. And this is true across ages. Now, enormous difference. As you can see here, people over 65, 64% of them say that they are still following the news all the time. When you talk to about 18 to 29-year-olds, that line down at the bottom, now we're only down at 19%. So all of these lines have been generally trending down, but especially younger people who are just not following the news. And that is a problem. These are the conditions of that information emergency. It's falling trust, cynicism and alienation from our systems and our sensors, which matters more than ever now because I think the battle surface of politics is information. And what people know and what they believe and who they trust has always been and is more important than ever in shaping the health of our communities and the health of our society. So let me just tease out one element of this that is a particular concern to me, especially as I talk to aspiring journalists who I'm hoping will infuse new energy, new curiosity, new sensibility into our profession, as each rising generation of journalists needs to do. Journalism is a form of lifelong learning. It is the way we keep learning after we're done going to school. And my concern is that we are living through what a writer named Maria Popova calls a pandemic of certainty. A pandemic of certainty, which weakens our immune system and our ability to keep democracy healthy. So what does that look like? Certainty, I would argue, is both a goal and a threat for journalists, and maybe for all of us. It's a goal because obviously it would be reckless and irresponsible to publish stories that we haven't fact-checked and double-checked and reviewed and revised in pursuit of what Woodward and Bernstein called the best obtainable version of the truth. Of course, we try to be certain in our journalism and in what we are reporting. But that's an outcome. That is an aspiration. My concern is with an attitude. One that I think increasingly defines our discourse and precludes discovery and arguably challenges democracy. We have now reckoned for years with the crisis of the business model for journalism. This is my snapshot of the apocalypse, of what it looked like when a very profitable business of newspapers throughout the 20th century, generally just a very good business to be in, ran into the catastrophic challenge that came from the fact that the platforms like Google and Facebook were just way better advertising vehicles than newspapers were. And advertising revenue just drained out of newspapers and broadcast television and other forms of traditional media, and all flooded into digital platforms that were terrific at targeting media. So that right now, Amazon alone makes more money in advertising than every single newspaper on the planet put together. Just Amazon alone, which you don't think of as an advertiser, right? what has happened is that we know that the algorithms that increasingly shape what people see favor outrage, that creators of content chase engagement, that our attention spans are shrinking as distractions around us are growing. All of those things accelerate not just the distrust and not just the news avoidance, but I think the elevation and incentivizing of certainty and of people expressing their views, not just with confidence and conviction, but with disdain for anyone who would question them. Certainty is everywhere. Social media swarms with people who are attacking books that they haven't read and flaming films that they haven't watched and deriding people who they haven't met for views that they may not even hold. That is what social media was designed for, to activate our lizard brains and touch the things that make us scared or mad or angry. Journalism aims higher, it digs deeper, it asks hard questions, and it is about being truth seekers, which is harder than ever when liars can dissolve the facts in what we are increasingly referring to as that fire hose of falsehood. It has never been easy to be truth seekers. That was never an easy assignment. If you think about just this week, we marked the 1-year anniversary of the attacks of October 7th. And it has been a year of immense suffering and intense division over rights and duties and America's role in the region and in the world. Those debates came after a pandemic that divided us in whole other ways about whether schools should remain closed and what were the origins of this pandemic. These are hard questions. People of goodwill can disagree about them. People can weigh the evidence differently. But certainty is an enemy of that kind of curiosity. We get smarter by engaging with people who disagree with us. I get the temptation. The world is complicated, certainty is simple, technology is opaque, I don't understand the devices I depend on, certainty is clear and comforting. Being full of doubt and distrust makes us wobble and waver. Certainty lets us strut. It is just a more comfortable position to be in. And in an attention economy, when the competition is really fierce, certainty is really profitable. There are all sorts of forces that pull us to be more sure of what we think. Certainty is a fist. Curiosity is just a fingertip. And yet it is so important for us to think about as we think about how we are going to rebuild the public faith in media. This is one professor who was examining the crisis of trust in news. And he says, part of the problem is that journalists seem maybe a little too sure of themselves. They write for each other. They come into their reporting with their minds already made up. I know this charge is wildly unfair to so many reporters who work so hard to keep an open mind, to do the hard work of actual bootstrap reporting. And yet the evidence really alarms me. There was another Washington Post poll of swing states that found that 7 out of 10 voters did not trust reporters to provide an accurate account of the campaigns that were going on in their states. Only 3 out of 10 thought that they could trust the reporting, which is critically important going into an election that we know is in all likelihood going to be decided once again by 40, 50,000 votes in a handful of states. And yet the people who live in those states are not trusting them. I had a one of my predecessors at Time who said that it's the job of journalists to turn answers into questions, to take what we know and unknow it, interrogate it, go back and see where might we have been wrong, what might we have missed, what else is there to learn and to know, what can we find out that is new. This is not an argument against passion or principle or conviction or the belief in these foundational principles of freedom and fairness and the dignity of every individual. But I worry when I hear sometimes about a kind of certainty that helps lock us in to the kind of separate and isolated information environments that citizens in this country increasingly live in. When you ask people, the vast majority say, you get different facts depending on where you go for news. If the news is the news, if what we are reporting is fair and true and we have done our jobs, then people may not like what we're reporting, but we shouldn't end up with different sets of facts depending on which newspaper you read or which television network you watched. And people are now saying, it isn't that we're disagreeing about what we should prioritize or which policy approaches are likely to be most successful. We aren't even getting to those conversations when you have overwhelming majorities saying, 85%, saying that we're disagreeing about basic facts. I don't know how we solve our problems as a country. I don't know how we move forward together if we can't even have the arguments we need to have with each other in which we disagree after starting with a common set of facts that we can then argue over which priorities do we elevate, which approaches do we think are likely to be superior. It is interesting to me that most people, even all of those surveys about do you trust the media, even those are misleading. Because in fact, people trust their own news sources. They don't trust what you're watching and reading. They trust what they're watching and reading. And if you ask people, how worried are you about whether your news source is biased? There's some worry about that. How worried are you that other people's news sources might be biased? They're really, really worried about that. So it's even easy to misunderstand the whole trust challenge because we're really certain that what we are hearing and watching is the truth. There are so many levels of complexity to how we got here. But one of the things we know for sure has been a result of that is we don't like each other much from across the political divide. And these numbers about rising partisanship, where the number of people who had a negative number of Republicans who had a negative view of Democrats was, 30 years ago, it was at 21%. It's now at 62% for Democrats. Negative views of Republicans went from 17 to 54. Has human nature changed in that time? Has our behavior changed? Or have the lenses through which we see each other changed? There is a lot of really interesting research that suggests that we see one another as though it's in a funhouse mirror. And in this survey that was done by Starts With Us, only 1 in 3 Democrats and Republicans think the members of the other party care about things like an accountable government, fair and equal application of the law, learning from the past to improve the country, personal responsibility. In fact, 9 out of 10 people do. It's like we have been primed to think the worst of one another. Now, how do we explain that? Well, for one thing, to the extent that our views of our debates are shaped by what we're seeing online, it is really easy to forget that the vast majority of people do not tweet, do not post, do not comment, do not share, do not engage with the forms of media that disproportionately shape and affect our perception of what's actually happening in our politics. When you ask people, 4 in 10 people say they never post, and another 30% say they rarely post about any political issues on social media. The people who are holding complex or nuanced or disparate views, where they're socially liberal on some things and conservative on other things, they are not talking publicly. They are not posting, they are not sharing, they are not engaging in the arena. And therefore, the people who we are hearing from and who are shaping the way our discourse sounds are not remotely representative of where we actually are. And people who identify as center left or center right are much more reluctant to post and comment on political issues than people who are further to the right or further to the left. So this is true across both parties. So we get the funhouse mirror, where only 1 in 5 people is actively taking part in our political debates, which is a very distorting view into the world. And that 1 in 5 is not a representative group. They're more male, they're more educated, they're wealthier, and they tend to be more partisan in their positions. So this is why when Stanford ran their Strengthening Democracy Challenge, which was looking for ways to reduce people's openness to political violence and levels of partisan opposition, that they found that getting 2 people who disagree profoundly with each other politically to collaborate on something together and then have a beer dramatically reduced, like just encountering each other in all of our complexity and humanity. Many of you may have had this experience over a Thanksgiving dinner, turned out to have a real impact in the level of hostility and distortion that people experienced about people who they disagreed with politically. And the people who say that they are news avoiders, when you ask them, well, what would it take to change that? They'll say, write about things that are working, write about solutions, write about things that explain the world to me. None of that, you will note, is focused on write about the reasons that I'm right to hate the people on the other side of the political divide. The kind of news people say that they want, you can say maybe they're telling researchers what they think researchers want to hear, but there is a lot of evidence that people don't want to be massaged with comforting, conforming, confirming content. And in fact, I love this finding that almost half of people who understand that algorithms are engineered to activate their emotions and engage them, they worry that that very personalized information diet they're getting means that they're missing out on important information and that they're not being exposed to challenging viewpoints. And some will go even further and say that they will block or follow or like or mute different accounts on social media in order to trick the algorithm into showing them a wider range of content. Like there's a little arms race between the humans and the robots about what kind of content they're going to see, because they know the platforms are optimized for engagement, and yet they want to send a little signal. No, I actually want to see kind of different, more diverse things. I think it is unreasonable and unfair to ask the Fourth Estate, to ask the press to save democracy, which is a goal I hear all the time. You guys have to save democracy. I think for those of us as journalists who believe that the stakes are very high, if we are tempted to filter our decisions or our headlines or frame our stories or our investigations through a lens of who might this help, who might this hurt, I have just one reminder. Only the voters can save democracy. Our job is to provide them with the best information we can so that they can make the best decisions that they can, not to make decisions for them. Thomas Jefferson said that whenever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. I acknowledge all the ways in which it is in some ways harder to keep the people well informed than ever, even in this golden age of communication. This is not, it does not include a responsibility to not call out leaders who lie or to treat all threats as equal. But it does include a fearless and tireless effort to find out what is true and then leave it to our readers to decide what to do with that truth. If we don't trust them, maybe we should not expect them to be trusting us. Trusting people or institutions is uncomfortable. Uncertainty is extremely uncomfortable. Exploration, however, is in our bones, our blood, and journalism is fundamentally a journey of exploration. I think we embrace uncertainty and we seek truth and we trust one another with it. And then we will make information available to all those who are able and willing to engage with it. If we model that, then I think we can hope to promulgate, evangelize, perpetuate that. So the challenge I put, especially to my young friends here, is you are more equipped than any generation ever to be able to tell powerful stories well, to be able to engage audiences with understanding and complexity and grapple with uncertainty and truth. And I look forward to you inspiring us to discover new ways of doing it. Thank you much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Hunt. As President Harlan said, I'm the chair of the Journalism and PR department here at the University of Rhode Island. And I had the pleasure of accompanying Nancy as she visited our introductory and advanced journalism classes today. We had great questions, great interaction throughout the day. And so from you or I want to thank you for your visit and being our Christiane Amanpour visiting journalist. And now we get to the fun part, the Q&A, where you can interact with Nancy. We have a microphone set up here for anybody who wants to ask a question. And I'll be joining Nancy moderating the Q&A. And while we wait for someone to come up to the mic, Nancy, my first question for you is, you've written more cover stories for Time magazine than any other writer. Which story do you think has had the most impact?
I think that the special issue of the magazine that we produced after September 11th was, and not because of anything I did so much as just the nature of that event and the nature of that story. And it was sort of a remarkable assignment where the editor called me up and about an hour and a half after the attacks had happened and said, we want to do a special issue of the magazine. We want to do it in 24 hours. Are you game to write the story? And I assumed, like any rational person, that he would be parallel processing. And so someone would write about what happened in New York, and someone would write about what happened in Washington, and someone would write about what is where is the investigation leading, and who might have done it, and what does this mean for a million different geopolitical. And so I'm like, okay, which story do you want me to do? He said, oh, there's only going to be one story. That seemed insane. He said, I just want you, he says, there's no way that we can know what is going to happen, 24 hours from now, much less a week, a month, a year. Just think that you're creating a time capsule. Because I just want you to write about today. Because every single person who works for this magazine is going out to report that story in every bureau around the world, and they will file to you, and they're going to file what is happening today. And it happened, our White House correspondent at the time, Jay Carney, had the press pool and was with President Bush as he was flying around from Florida to Nebraska to back. So we had amazing reporting on what was happening out of the White House and out of the Pentagon, and that the Sears Tower in Chicago was being evacuated and Disneyland was being evacuated, and parents were pulling their kids out of school in Alabama, and the whole country around the world was reacting to this day. And the whole organism of our news gathering infrastructure just kicked into gear to go find out how we are reacting to this extraordinary event. And so as both an act of kind of the very collective, collaborative work that journalism is, on a story that we knew, however this all turned out, we were going to want to remember what happened that day. And so I think the reason I think about its impact is I still, I constantly come across people who, I saved that issue. I still have that issue. I knew I was going to want to keep that issue. The cliche about journalism as the first draft of history, we sort of felt it there. It's like, we know we're going to write 1 million words about what happened and what this means in the weeks and months to come. But today, just captured the day, and that's hopefully the one.
Thank you. Thank you. It looks like we have a question.
Hi, my name's Emily. I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you. As a sophomore journalism student, I feel like it's easy to hear, I know people aren't trusting the media, stuff like that, but also just from family, friends, they're nervous about journalism even being alive by the time graduation comes around. So how do you I hear that and I love it. I'm so passionate about it, but how do you stay encouraged that, despite everyone not trusting it, just despite everyone thinking, a lot of people thinking it won't be here, especially TV news, how do you recommend we stay encouraged that we can fix this?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because there's understandably a lot of focus on the economic challenges that the industry is facing, and those are real, and a lot of interesting, passionate, purpose-driven people are trying to figure out the business model question. So that's one set of issues, and I'm pretty confident that reliable information is something people need to live successful lives. You need food, you need water, you need to breathe the air. You need to be able to have access to information that is true. It's a human right to have access to information. And so I believe that the demand for what journalists do is always going to exist. So there's one question about how do we figure out the way to pay for it, because journalism it costs money to go find things out. And then there's the parallel issue you raise about, and then once we've done the work and we've done the reporting and we've gathered the facts and done the FOIA requests and analyzed the data, what happens if people don't believe us? That is a related but different challenge. And it is one where a lot of the work that needs to be done, I would argue, is not going to need to be done by journalists. It's going to need to be done by regulators, lawyers, and policymakers wrestling with the accountability of platforms who have made it so easy to both take and not monetize the content that journalists are creating, and flooding the information environment with just garbage information that drowns out the reliable information and misleads people and undermines people's trust and faith in the information that is true. So there's a whole issue around the accountability of platforms, which journalists aren't going to solve. That is going to be up to governments, policymakers, regulators to do, which I think will hugely help journalism. And then I think, and I have, my colleagues at Harvard are working on this, there's a lot of work for social scientists and psychologists to understand what drives people's decisions about who and what to trust. I think we often find ourselves surprised by how quickly the very fabric of our communities has been stretched and torn. And we're in kind of unmapped territory. And so there is research to be doing to help us understand how that happened and how to repair it. There's regulatory and legal work to be done about fighting the mis and disinformation. Journalists just need to keep on doing what they have always done and do it well. And I'm absolutely confident that there will be an appetite and an audience for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question.
Hi, I'm Casey. We met in Journalism 310 Media Law and Ethics. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for coming, since you already had to listen to me.
It was great having you come to class. Anyway, my question is, what was the idea and like the formula you had for writing the President's Club?
Oh, what an interesting question. It was an accident. What happened was my bureau chief in Washington, Michael Duffy, who's a longtime colleague, and I were working on a book about the one person in modern American history who had a close personal relationship with not one, not two, not three, but 9 American presidents. And that was Billy Graham. And so we were fascinated by how it was that this single religious leader became close to that many men who ended up in the White House, in many cases 20, 30 years before they even went into politics, right? And so as we were working on that book, we kept on discovering these back channel communications and relationships between the presidents, and Graham was often like the courier between like a secret conversation between Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson in 1968. And Graham was the messenger. And we're like, wait a minute, and I literally called Michael in the middle and saying, we're writing the wrong book. And he was like, well, thanks for the heads up. No, the right book is about the presidents with each other. And like, there's so much more there that I haven't read anywhere, but like, I want to know what we can find out about that. And so, our belief was that shockingly, presidents are human too, and there are things that they need in order to do that job. And among the few people on the planet who understand that are the other people who've done it. And that created the foundation for very surprising, counterintuitive, but important relationships that actually spoke to the impulse that people had to really put the good of the country first. And the number of times we found ways in which former presidents were helping sitting presidents, regardless of party, in the interests of what was for the good of the country, we saw that over and over and over again. And it was actually like one of the most heartening, in a time of political division, it was like, oh, that was really helpful to hear. So that's where that came from.
Thank you, Casey.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I'm here with a number of people in this row. We all work for the Good Five Cigar, which is the student paper here at
Best
URI.
name for a student newspaper.
Right, we hear that a
lot.
That's why. I'm glad whoever came up with it in the 70s did a good job, because we get remembered a lot for it. But anyway, so as someone who's been in a leadership position there for like a couple of years now, I'm sure we've experienced only a very small fraction of kind of the stress and the pressure that you've experienced doing it at kind of the highest level. And so when it comes to making like really tough decisions, ethical stuff, you're working on deadline, with journalism, that's kind of the nature of the job. I'm just wondering, in kind of those very tough moments, having done it for so long at such a high level, what kind of keeps you motivated?
It's a really interesting question. I think anyone can burn out, and it's really important to be, self-care like matters in every profession, and especially matters in high stress professions. But where I think journalism has maybe unique advantages, and what certainly sustained me, was that it goes back to this sort of the team sport. I felt like our team of reporters and editors and art directors and photographers, like everyone within the system, wanted what was best for the institution and to help one another succeed. And so when I was really stumped with what's the right thing to do here, or had hard decisions to make, I completely trusted my colleagues to tell me the truth. That they were not going to tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. They were not going to tell me what was in their best political, personal, professional interest. That they were going to give me their best judgment. and that we would be able to disagree with each other, because the nature of hard questions is there are good reasons to come down on either side of a hard question. That's what makes it hard. The confidence I had that I was going to get candid and genuine advice from people, and that both individually and collective, we were going to do the best we could for what we were trying to accomplish. That let me sleep at night. It didn't mean that we were going to get all of our decisions right, but I was confident I wasn't going to go back and second guess of like, oh, if only so-and-so had told me what was really going on, or hadn't been afraid to tell me that I was making a terrible mistake. And so that, I think, is really good for like your mental health as well as for your organization's success. So everything that you can do as a leader to help create the space and the permission structure that people will not tell you things that they think you want to hear. They will tell you what they really think, is a huge contributor to the success of the organization.
Thank you. Jamie?
Hi, my name is Jamie. I am a PR major here, and hearing you talk about how people kind of alter their algorithm to not see the not so great news and everything, like also as like a young voter and also someone who just wants to stay informed, how can I try to eliminate seeing fake news or like biased news within the media?
That's a really important question. And I will say, I don't know that there's any way that you will not be exposed to mis and disinformation, to fake news, because it is everywhere. But I strongly urge you to, and those of you who heard me earlier today know that this is sort of the gospel I preach to my students, is to think of yourselves as intelligence officers, where you need to widen the lens. And if you were normally watching certain networks, reading certain websites, certain newspapers, listening to certain podcasts, that's fine. But every so often, very intentionally, look for ways to listen to things that you don't normally hear, watch networks you don't normally watch, read things you would not otherwise read. And the world will look different to you, because now you will be walking in the shoes of people who are consuming different media diets. And you will see, oh, this is what the world looks like to them. If this is what I was listening to every day, I would think those things too. And it makes some of the animosity in a way less scary, because it helps you realize, oh, I'm an intelligent person of goodwill. If that's what I was hearing, I would think all of those same things. Another intelligent person of goodwill, who disagrees with me, a lot of it has to do with what it is that they are seeing and hearing. And so I think that it isn't going to protect you from seeing mis and disinformation, but it is going to give you a subtle and more nuanced understanding of the different information environments that people are operating in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. We have time for one more question, and then we'll have closing remarks from Dean Riley.
My name is Vince, and I think some of the older people in the room will appreciate this. So when I grew up, we had 3 channels. We had ABC, NBC, and CBS. So there were 3 networks, and the national news came on at night for about a half an hour. And
I was actually alive during those years.
were you? And it's not like you had news 24/7. At a certain point, if you turned the TV on at night, it was static. There was nothing on TV. But from what I can remember, when we watched the national news at night, it wasn't as if we turned to a certain network because we felt there was a bias. It's just that you may have liked that anchor
Right.
better than another anchor. So you kind of answered this previously, but my question for you is, if I could only watch one network, what would the most unbiased network be in your opinion?
I mean, I'm tempted to say one that is not based in the United States. Because, and part of the news diet rotation I assign my students is not just, switch from left to right and right to left. It's also switch to non-US based and then go on a fast and don't watch or listen to anything and see what that feels like. Right? So, I'm not going to, sort of rank the bias or partisanship of the, of American cable networks or or broadcast networks. And I actually do believe that just relying on any one network, even if it is doing the best it can to be dispassionate and avoid partisanship, it is still more valuable to mix it up, and you will still come away with a much more complex and nuanced understanding of what is happening. But I think it is very interesting for us in this country, where our media tends to be so heavily focused just on events in this country. I mean, all of you, anytime if you have traveled and found yourself in a hotel room where you were no longer watching the networks you normally watch, the world looks different. And experimenting with that from here, which has never been easier. I mean, we can watch anything anywhere now. So I strongly recommend that you run little experiments on yourself about your news diet.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Nancy, thank you for joining us today. And thank you for taking the time you took to spend time with our students in the classroom, and to our students who had that experience. I hope you gain something from the value of being able to talk with people who are doing the work in the field, and do that more as you go along. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to our live stream people out there, who I know we got our technology to work. We were a little late for that, so thanks for your patience with that. And then, as always, thanks to Christiane for supporting this and for helping us educate the next generation of journalists here at URI. Everyone have a great night.
Thank you.